Hi, I think I'm recording. Hang on, let me stop it. Can't
What?
see with my glasses on.
What are you looking at, Kristen?
It said recording in progress, but I don't see that I'm recording.
Oh, that wouldn't be good.
We may be recording right now. Oh, here we go.
Okay. We good?
I can't tell if I'm recording to the cloud like I'm supposed to be.
It is recording. Is it broadcasting?
Yes. We have a lot of people in the audience.
Okay.
Well, for our typical meeting, we do.
Yeah, that's quite a few.
Okay, shall we go ahead and get started?
Okay, I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission meeting of November 23rd. As everybody can see, this is a remote meeting, and if you want to be heard, you have to raise your hand. If you need to call, there's a number on the agenda. And people attending will be guests. Can we have the roll call?
Kristen, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Vice Chair Kunzler,
I'm here.
Commissioner Swisher,
Hold on. Hey, present.
Chair Wagstaff.
I am here.
And for the record, let it show that both Natasha Chalmers and Laura Taber are absent.
Thank you, Kristen. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak on something that's not on the agenda? This is when we hear that.
So, oh, she took her hand down. I had one hand up and she took it down. Okay, we have no hands up.
Okay, can I have the planning director's report, please?
Okay, thank you, Chairman Wagstaff. Just a couple quick items for housekeeping. The city hall will be closed for the Thanksgiving break, the Thanksgiving holiday. That is Thursday, and we are closed on Friday. There's no inspections or permit activity occurring on Friday as well. We'll be closed then. On other news, we did receive word today from ABAG that the executive committee has adopted the final RENA allocation numbers. And despite several communities within Marin, as well as several other communities around the Bay Area, the ABAG did not change any of the numbers or reallocate any units within Marin to Marin or to other communities. So Marin's numbers, Larkspur's RENA and Marin's RENA remains the same as the initial draft. Couple other items. We are in the process of working on I'm working with city attorney on an urgency order to address SB 9 and SB 10. And for those in the community who are familiar, these are state mandates that permit duplex development by right in single family zones, subject to certain conditions and constraints, but and also state mandates that permit for what are deemed as urban lot splits in single family residential zones. Again, there's a number of particular parameters and qualifiers to the state law that we need to kind of sink in with our zoning. And at this stage, we're planning to prepare an interim urgency ordinance to at least provide a process and some clarity as to where these state requirements are applicable. Again, the state has designed these as mandates. So It's not something that the city can necessarily just deny or say no to, but there are certain conditions or clarifications that we can apply to those types of applications. So we're working on that. We anticipate we'll have an urgency ordinance going to the city council in December. And that'll probably be a topic of discussion as we get into the housing element. Also on the housing element, as you're aware, the city clerk is working with our housing consultant and myself and city manager on arranging for some meeting dates for a meeting and then eventually a workshop meeting with steering committee members, two of which brought Chair Wagstaff and Vice Chair Kunstler on the steering committee. So that's in motion, and we'll be setting a steering committee workshop for early in the year in January. Other news is the city manager has now, as I believe, executed contract to have a interim planning director come in to fill my position. And his name is Daniel Hostert. He works with Four Leaf Incorporated. That's a company that provides services for planning and building services for communities. And he will begin working with us after next week and early in December and begin preparing for a transition while the city does continue to recruit for a community development director position. And that's all I have to report.
Does anybody have any questions for Neil? Okay, I guess there are no questions. We don't have any consent items, so we'll move on to the public hearing items. And the first one is item 2112, an amendment to the ordinance regarding some of the lots on Rose Lane or Rose Garden.
Before you begin, Neil, we have an individual with their hand up. They've had it up since for some time now. I'm not entirely sure if they mean to be putting their hand up. At this point, Mr. Kruger, your hand is up. Do you wish to speak on a
It's
matter?
not the public presentation time right now.
I'm wondering if he missed the matters not on the agenda is the only thing. How do you want to handle that, Neil?
Well, if you'd like to ask him if he wants to speak on something not on this agenda, not on the agenda tonight, we could do that after the item's done.
Okay.
Okay, is that the
I
proper
think
way to
that-
do
or
it?
if the chair would like to just entertain a query, apparently he's still has his hand up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let's treat it as an item not on the agenda and let him talk if he wants to.
Mr. Kruger, I have to ask you to unmute yourself so that you can speak. Mr. Kruger, are you aware that your hand is up and which indicates that you feel you needed to speak on something out of turn?
Yes, sorry, I stepped away. How are y'all? Can you hear me?
Good, yes.
Great.
We're only entertaining matters not on the agenda at this moment. If you're here for one of the business items, then we need to have you wait till we finished our presentations.
Mhm. Right. So, yeah, so I had a question and a comment regarding PPA / text 2112.
That is on the agenda. So
Okay, great. Yeah,
we'll
I'll
take
wait.
you with public comment.
Okay, thank you. Could we have the staff report on item 2112?
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Wagstaff and members of the commission. The applicant is requesting approval to amend the Central Larkspur specific plan and precise development plan standards in order to reduce the required 50-foot building and impervious setback requirement, measured from the top of bank of the east-west reach of Larkspur Creek to 25 feet from the top of the bank, as well as the existing requirement for a 50-foot setback from the top of creek bank for a primary residential structure to remain, except for lot 27, to maintain existing minor encroachment of the main residence into the 50-foot setback. The amendments are requested to number 1, amend the Central Larkspur Specific Plan Standard 63B of Policy D65, the Natural Resource Protection Standards, as well as the Governing Precise Development Plan, which was adopted under Ordinance number 972, 1004, and 1050. More specifically, the proposed amendments would focus on development standards 4, 6, 10, 11, and 15. The proposed amendment setbacks are shown in attachment 1 of the staff report. And perhaps, Kristen, you can put up the graphic illustration. So the current proposal and request would not modify the land use restrictions within the 25-foot natural resources buffer. The proposed amendments to the precise development setbacks would modify the 50-foot building and impervious surface setback to a 25-foot building and impervious surface setback, allowing the use of fenced yard areas, in other words, the rear yards of these homes, while maintaining a 50-foot setback for primary structures. This change would allow installation of impervious surfaces such as patios or accessory structures within the rear yard spaces. Additionally, the building and impervious surface setback along the side yard of lot 22 is proposed to be amended to follow the east side property line and fence. The upland habitat buffer will remain in a restored natural state. No other primary structures would be permitted within the prescribed setback area. Under the proposed amendments, the 50-foot setback from the top of bank of Larkspur Creek would be renamed 50-foot setback for primary structures, and the 25-foot setback would be renamed 25-foot building and impervious surface setback. So more specifically, what are these amendments? The amendment to the Central Larkspur Specific Plan or class is just one, and that again is the Policy D65 Standard 63B, Natural Protection Standards, which would change to indicate no building or impervious surface may be closer than 25 feet to the top of bank, and no primary residential structure may be located closer than 50 feet to top of bank. The remaining amendments all fall within the development standards of the precise development plan. And the first one would be 4B, which are permitted uses, and this just modifies the chapter numbers. The second one is 6B, affordable housing component, and again, it modifies the chapter numbers. In terms of 10D, the setbacks and lot coverage, it replaces the existing language with new text, and I'll indicate what the new text is. The building and impervious surface setbacks for the east-west reach of creek, including lots 22 through lot 29. No building or impervious surface may be located closer than 25 feet to the top of the bank of the east-west reach of the creek, and no primary structure may be located closer than 50 feet to the top of the bank, except for residence on lot 27, which shall be no less than 48.8 feet from top of bank for the 56.5 width of the rear wall, and no less than 45 feet from top of bank for a 13.5 foot wide protrusion located at the center of the rear wall. This is all depicted on a plan titled Creek Setback Diagram Number 1 proposed. Next would be the amended section 10E, setbacks and lot coverage. It adds new text. And the new text would read, building and impervious surface setbacks for north-south reach of creek. No building or impervious surface may be located closer than 50 feet to the top of bank of the north-south reach of the creek, excepting the northeast property line of Lot 22, reducing the width of 50-foot building and impervious surface setback to the point where the fence meets the 25-foot building and impervious surface setback along the east-west reach of the creek as depicted on the attached diagram titled Proposed Yard Layout and Fence Location at 65 Rose Lane, Lot 22. And further, no primary structure is permitted within 50 feet of the top of bank along the north-south reach of the creek. The next amendment would be to section 11, and this would now read, architectural protrusions from primary residential structures located adjacent to the top of bank of creek, consistent with Larkspur Municipal Code Section 18.16.110B. Ordinary architectural features on primary dwelling structures may project up to 3 feet from the footprint of the building. And lastly, it will amend section 15, creek and buffer areas, and it adds a new sentence to the end of it, which reads, no building or impervious surface may be located closer than 50 feet to the top of north-south reach of the creek bank, except as provided in section 10E, which we just stated. So in conclusion, what we found is that there is no substantive impact to the surrounding properties. The location of the natural resource buffer setback is determined by the surveyed top of bank, which follows a meandering line along the rear of the dwellings, with exceptions to Lot 22, which is bounded by both the 25-foot and the 50-foot creek natural resources buffer setback. The natural resource buffer will be continued to be protected by fencing as required, is not accessible, and therefore it's protecting the creek. The rear yards are constrained with range and size of approximately 1,700 square feet to 1,900 square feet in area, and have an average 25 feet in depth to the rear yard fence line, where the natural resources buffer begins. These backyards are not large enough to accommodate significant accessory buildings without occupying much of the open yard space. The sites are also subject to site coverage limitations specified in the precise development plan. The neighborhood is now occupied and the residents are seeking the ability to enjoy their rear yard space in a manner consistent with other dwellings throughout the neighborhood. The present restriction is impractical to allow reasonable enjoyment of the backyards and very challenging to enforce. The Homeowners Association supports the proposed amendment, and staff recommends that the Planning Commission support the requested amendment for consideration by the City Council. We have received public comments. There were 5 public comments that were received during the preparation of the staff report, and they express opposition to the requested text amendments. They can be found in attachment number 5. Additionally, we received 3 late mail messages, of which 2 express opposition to the amendments and 1 expressed concerns. Both of these comments have been provided to the commissioners. So staff recommends approval of the proposed text amendments to the language of the class and the development standards of the precise development plan to reduce the required 50-foot building and impervious setback requirements to 25 feet from the top of the bank. Once the Planning Commission has reviewed the item, provided comments, your recommendation would be advisory to the City Council. And this concludes my staff report.
Does anybody have any questions for Lorraine?
I have a couple questions, Brock.
One thing could I note for the record before we get to questions is we did just at about almost 6 o'clock this evening before the meeting, received an added email from Susan Whitney at 5:49.
That's what I included Neil?
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was referenced in that. So that's been sent to the planning commission.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Brock, I've got a couple of questions, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and Lorraine, thank you very much for this report. It was very thoughtful, very and very thorough.
I could barely hear you, Daniel.
Yeah, maybe
Is that better?
that's better.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Got a fancy mic, but what I have to do is turn it up. Thanks so much, Lorraine, for your very thoughtful and thorough report. My questions, I know this is very delicate because this is something which is going to the city council on advisory for us. So the wording, in fact, is delicate, and I appreciate that. But definitionally, that's why I've just got a couple of questions, because we speak of impervious surfaces. And the way I understand impervious to mean in common English is something that is actually waterproof, where water does not get through, cannot penetrate. So I was wondering if any consideration has been given or can be given to hardscapes which are compatible with, let's say, the construction of a patio, but are porous enough for the water not to simply sweep off that area, but actually go into the ground through a porous material. And I looked online, and there are quite a few patio compatible porous materials that are available. So I was wondering if that's something that should be considered. The other definitional question I've got before you answer that one has to do with sort of the definition of an auxiliary structure in this context. So so I understand, and the applicant has pointed this out, that their intent would be things like a tool shed, a play yard, and then non-enclosed structures like a sunshade or pergola. But I was wondering if the distinction between the primary structure and the auxiliary structure is pointed enough. So theoretically, and again, this is going into a city document, so it does not pertain necessarily to this property only. But would, let's say, an ADU be permitted within that setback of 25 feet, or between 25 and 50 feet, or not? Would there be any kind of square footage restrictions for any kind of enclosed structure within that setback also? So I don't think any of these items would necessarily inhibit the plans of the applicant, but I was wondering, for the sake of the wording of what's going to the council, whether it's worth considering, semi-permeable surfaces for things like patio structures, and maybe some square foot restrictions, or let's say a definition which specifies that an auxiliary structure cannot be habitable if something is placed within the setback.
Okay, I'll try to answer some of these. Okay, yes, several questions, several items to address. And the first would be impervious surfaces. Would we entertain hardscape patios that are porous, that are semi-pervious surfaces? We have not literally defined specifically all the different scenarios that could occur, because there are many different products out there. But I suppose we could provide some kind of general definition if it would help to better create these standards that are being modified. In terms of ADUs in the setback, we would allow accessory dwelling units in the setback. In terms of the size of them, it would really depend on, every yard is slightly different. So it would also depend on the floor plan and building envelope of the primary structure, and how an ADU would sort of modify the backyard. And then, property owners would have less open space to use in their backyard if there's an accessory dwelling unit. So my assumption is if someone were to propose an accessory dwelling unit, it would be a relatively small unit. Whether we want to define the size that we would like to have in those rear yards, I think I would defer to Neil to see if he has some assumptions about that. And then in terms of other structures in the rear yard, we would expect any other structures not to be habitable.
Yeah, and or not even enclosed, but I think the applicant was speaking specifically of pergola and sunshade. But that wouldn't be my concern. It'd be more that, well, is there a sort of a back door to extending the primary residence?
I think to kind of address that last point, the back door to extending the residence, if it's attached to the residence and it's, then it would have to meet the requirements for the primary structure setback. So you can have a detached accessory structure, and then that, as with any yard space, any rear yard space, a detached accessory structure has different setback allowances than a primary structure. So that, I hope that answers that question, that anything sort of attached and integrated with the primary structure would have to observe that 50-foot setback. But as for the other 2 points, as Lorraine said, we haven't, the CLASP, in fact, and our code doesn't specifically define impervious. There are, as she mentioned, there are many more permeable types of pavers and materials. And we do sometimes have to address that. The point of this request is because generally the city does not issue permits or have oversight of flat work. So if you don't have a permit process, it's difficult to enforce any particular standard. So in the non-hillside areas, we don't exercise oversight over particular types of paving, what's pervious surfaces or not, but certainly there's a growing industry of more permeable types of pavers and such, just for the purpose of allowing more infiltration and reducing runoff.
Yeah, and those areas tend to dry more quickly.
Yeah, many property owners use that. For the other point about the ADUs, the state law actually has a by right specifications for ADUs less 800 square feet or less, 15 feet below, 15 feet or less in height, and more than 4 feet from property lines. That's a by right standard. It could apply to the current condition and would apply to the proposed. Beyond that, the standard approaches to site coverage, setbacks, and all those would apply as they do to any other property.
Okay, thank you. One last little detailed question: when you talk about the 3 feet for an architectural feature, just as examples, that would be like a stoop or a bay window or something like that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thanks.
Jeffrey, do you have any questions?
No, I'm following it pretty well. I don't really have any questions at this point.
Lorraine, I have a couple of questions. Just because it seems to be the way it's written, it's hard for people to understand, but the fences remain where they are. They do not move out toward the creek. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. And normally, and I don't know, it's been long enough that I'm not sure about Larkspur, but in most communities, you're only allowed to have 40% impervious in a yard. Is that the case with Larkspur also?
I'm not aware of a regulation specific to that. The Public Works Department does, when there are development applications involving new coverage or like new impervious surfaces, new structures, expansion of footprints, there's a requirement to provide a drainage plan that identifies how that runoff is captured without adding to runoff into the system. But that's done when there's a permit to trigger that. So there can be minor improvements, minor hardscaping, things like that don't necessarily trigger that type of review.
Okay. And normally an accessory structure has a limit of 120 square feet, does it not?
That's the limit of requirement to get a building permit.
Okay. But ADUs are up to 500 square feet. So
They can be that or more.
yeah, I mean, that's a pretty big structure in a small yard. So I think for now, that's the only questions I had. Thanks.
And I think the other point of emphasis in the staff report, which we didn't focus on so much in the presentation, but probably worthwhile, is clarifying that these sites all drain inwards towards the internal drainage system along Camellia, along Rose Lane, and drains out to the expansive retention pond, retention basin adjacent to that, then overflows. When it does retain, it permeates and then eventually can overflow into the creek, but is a retention area. The site, during the class, the initial concept for this development was that the site would all kind of drain outwards, and there might be retention and slowing of drainage as it comes off of an overall mound towards the creek. The design ultimately, as our water storm drainage permits became more refined to assure treatment through treatment of runoff before it gets to the creek, ended up with a more refined design that actually captured the water internally and brings it in this portion of the site, all drains through that large retention and treatment facility.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks.
And I do have graphics of those if the commission wishes to see.
I think we're okay for now. Would the applicant like to make a presentation, and we ask that you try to keep it to 10 minutes if you can? You see a hand? Or Lorraine, whoever's looking.
I see. Is there somebody from an attendee with their hand up?
There are now 3. We have Rick Kruger still, Chris Wheaton, and Julie Electa.
Let's start with Julie. I think she is representing the property owners.
Julie, I've just allowed you to talk. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Julie Electa. I am actually a resident of the Terraces, but I sit on the board, the HOA board for the Master Rose Lane Association. So does Mr. Wheaton. So you have 2 HOA members here who can address this. And I'd like to thank Lorraine for a very, very clear presentation of what is difficult to understand. I came to this as a stranger myself, and it took me a long time to understand the history, the geography, the difference between the buffer zone and the setback. And I simply would like to reinforce a couple of the concepts that have already been expressed here. first of all, these are very, very small backyards. As someone who lives not in the housing part, but in these senior residences, when I first saw these backyards, I said, whoa, there's no backyard here. They're very small backyards, and the residences have been very creative in making use of them, and they, more than any individuals, really enjoy and protect the buffer. These are not people who are trying to turn their small backyards into little mini carnivals. They're people who really enjoy where they live. They enjoy the environment, the buffer. They're conscientious about drainage and all of the issues that that you've talked about tonight, as well as many of the issues that I've seen in the comment letters. So I and other members of the HOA board felt very comfortable putting forth this application on behalf of all the Creekside residents because they share a common appreciation for their good fortune in living next to this wonderful habitat. And I think that the proposal makes good sense because the impervious surface restriction seems somewhat redundant given all the work that has gone into structuring drainage so that it flows away from the creek for those houses. Other quick comments I would make is that I appreciate the concern about ADUs and working with my neighbors along Rose Lane. I'm not aware of any intention, but I understand that you have to consider that possibility. I would also point out that some of the uses of the very small backyards already include barbecues, portable hot tubs, but it in no way impairs the habitat or the protection of that small environmental strip that runs along the creek. If anything, the encroachment on the creek environment tends to come from the other side of the street from the Meadowwood Drive homes. And with that, I'll close my comments and perhaps give some time to Chris Wheaton, who is also here and I think had his hand raised.
Thank you. You have, can you see Chris's hand?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to state our case here. I'm a resident of Rose Lane. I actually live in one of the Creekside homes. If you're looking at the map, it's number 26. We live here, have lived here since 2014, and we're aware of the impervious surface restrictions. And almost from the start, the neighbors started talking about how we might be able to lift the restrictions, which seems somewhat onerous for that area that's at least in our fenced area. I think there's been some objections to this change, and I think they may come from people who don't understand this complicated 50-foot buffer area. We are basically looking at an area that's 25 feet from the back of our home into a fence. And that area is the area we're trying to have the changes to allow impervious structures. The area that's from our fence, the 25-foot area that goes from the fence to the creekside, we're not recommending any changes. That's somewhat of an environmental easement that we all agreed to, that we would not walk back there, not do anything back there. And it's basically maintained periodically by the maintenance crew that the HOA pays for to preserve that area. I'd reiterate Julia's comment that after all of this, the clasp was passed, after the construction began, there was a change in the way the drainage worked, which may have influenced the original restriction had that been the case, in the sense that the drainage, instead of going to the creek, the area in the setback area now flows into drain pipes on either side of each of those properties. and gets moved out into the street area, the pitch of those properties was also changed so that they're much higher than the street, so that naturally the water comes in, any runoff goes into those side drainage areas and then flows out to the creek. So that change certainly helped to mitigate the concerns that some people had of the fact that the water might be flow off of an impervious surface and then flow into the creek. And that change, I think, is fairly material and should be noted. And I think also the runoff concern is there. And then also, we're just asking for a change in the fenced area. If you think about 25 feet, it's a very small area, as Julie pointed out, and think about 4 6-foot people lying end to end. That's the amount of our backyard that's usable. We have another 25 feet that's not usable. So to the extent you want to put, a patio or lawn chairs or do anything to enjoy your backyard, you're forced into this impervious surface restriction. And the original amendment was coordinated by somebody that's also a Creekside homeowner that wanted to just put a exercise pool in her backyard, just a small pool, and to allow her to do lap swimming during COVID, and could not do so. You couldn't put necessarily a kid's little fort back there. You couldn't put all sorts of things that were restricted. So it really restricts our livelihood back there. And we're not asking for the sun and the moon. We're just asking for a little bit of freedom to actually have a normal backyard, again, just in that fenced area. So we're asking for approval of the ordinance, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Appreciate your talking to us. Is there anybody else that's part of the application or the applicant? If not, is there anybody from the audience that would like to speak either for or opposed to this item? You see anybody, Kristen?
We've got a couple hands up.
You have to raise your hands to be called on.
Rick Kruger, your hand is now down. So, Brock, do you want to go ahead and call on people? Can you see them?
Actually, let's see. I see 5 hands. Yeah. Why don't
Julie
we-
Electa, who gave a part of the presentation, still has her hand up. I don't know.
Yeah,
if
that's
she's-
what I was looking at. Does she want to say something additionally, Julie?
Yes, if I could just, this is Julie Electa again, make another quick comment. And that is to go to the enforcement issue that Mr. Croft raised. There is a lot of, the HOA is responsible from its own resources to maintaining the, shall I say, the sacred buffer, the beautiful environmental strip right along the creek. And there's been a lot of planting every year. We go in, we go in and we pull Scotch broom, and we really keep that buffer healthy and full of. It gets richer and more beautiful every year. We do that as part of our responsibilities as the HOA. We're also responsible for enforcing the clasp within the HOA, and that means that we have to understand when the Creekside residences do even the smallest thing, whether there's an impervious surface issue. We don't like to involve the city unless there's a problem. And there are a variety of new services all the time coming into use. So there's also an enforcement burden on the HOA to try to figure out what works, what doesn't work. and for a requirement that really isn't helping anything. It's really a redundant requirement because of the pitch change and the drainage change. It would be better if we could spend even more resources working on the true environmental protections that are necessary for the creek, i.e. the protections from the fence down to the creek in the buffer area. That was my final word. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Julie. Can we call on Melissa Dawson, who's the next down on my list?
Melissa, you've been allowed to talk.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good evening, and thanks for letting me speak. I live at 21 Liberty Street. I've lived in Heather Gardens for 23 years, and I walk the path along the Larkspur Creek opposite the Rose Garden development many times a week. I appreciate the work of the planning department on the report, but I feel that it fails to address fully the history of the setback and its purposes. As many of us remember, the approval of the Rose Garden development came after many years of public hearings and significant concern by the community about the impact of building a neighborhood in a space that's not only prime real estate, but also prime habitat because of its location near the Larkspur Creek. Many people were also concerned about the number of units that were proposed and how the addition of an entire neighborhood would affect the peaceful natural setting that's always been cherished by Larkspur residents. At one hearing, the Hall Middle School gym was filled with people expressing opposition to the proposal of the developers. And it was soon after that that the proposed setback area was increased by 25 feet. And I think I do understand the distinction between the first 25 and the second 25, by the way. It was essentially, I understood, and I think many others did, a concession by the developers, one of a couple, to get the community support. And the community did get on board. And with that compromise, the plan was approved. And to be clear, the increase in the setback area was not just about runoff and water quality. These restrictions were also supposed to preserve important natural habitat, keep the area adjoining the creek quiet and natural, rather than turning it into a suburban thoroughfare. Now, less than 10 years later, some of the Roseland residents want to roll back these restrictions so they can build pools and pergolas, among other things. I have nothing but the best wishes for our new community members, but I object to this. The applicants bought these houses knowing they were located in this very, very special place along the Larkspur Creek. And they also knew that these houses carried some restrictions that other houses in the neighborhood did not. These restrictions were put in place as part of a balancing by the entire community as the result of a great deal of community engagement. Approving this application amounts to abandoning a commitment that was made to the community with respect to the balance that we all agreed to between allowing development, providing housing, and protecting our natural environment. I strongly oppose this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Going down the list, Peter Krasnov.
Good evening. Peter Krasnoff from 8 Liberty Street. I am a professional civil engineer as well as a qualified stormwater pollution plan developer in the state of California. So I have a fair amount of experience in understanding some of the items that Mr. Toft has raised about controlling runoff. As one of the conditions of the permit issued by the State Water Resources Control Board for the design of this development, it requires that the amount of runoff before construction, the volume of runoff before construction and after construction be the same. It's actually signed by a professional engineer and establishes that balance. And while I've heard this evening a number of times that the runoff is going to flow a certain direction, I've read the report saying it's going to be minimal. The one thing I would request to be consistent with what the state permit required is an essential element is that there be some demonstration that there is no increase in the amount of runoff. And I believe that the reason the impervious surface requirement is there is the only way the developer could make that work was by the amount of pervious surface. And it seems as if this is a creep past the permit, because at the end of the construction permit, there's a submittal made to the state where they terminate the construction permit, they make the certification. By continuing this project, redesigning it after it's been certified, it's undoing that certification. So I would request that at least a condition be that there's an engineering evaluation and certification so that we're not increasing the volume of runoff. It doesn't matter how it's flowing, it's the net increase that has the impact on the environment. And so I just want to make sure that that is considered in this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's see, Melissa Dawson. I think you have to unmute.
I think we had Melissa.
That's what
Didn't
I
we?
thought. Yeah. Right. How about Karen?
Hi, good evening. I'm Karen Ellingbo. I also live at 8 Liberty Street in Larkspur. And I sent in a letter expressing several concerns about the approval of these amendments, including those things just mentioned by Peter Krasnoff. I'm concerned, especially because the city doesn't tend to have any sort of permitting process for installing patios and decks and whatnot. The cumulative impact of all of the different impervious structures and installations that could happen in the backyard could be significant. And I don't see any sort of evaluation. If you approve this amendment, you're opening the door effectively and I know that people will say, well, it's not likely to happen, but you're effectively opening the door to paving that whole section because there's no way to regulate it. And if it is approved, I would want to see some sort of way to regulate it. I don't know how that would be, especially given that, as Mr. Toff said, there is no permitting requirement for most of those things that would go in the backyard. So I think you would need to demonstrate that paving all of those areas completely would not increase the runoff and impact the environment in that way. I also think this whole issue about the drainage and the change of slope, that is something that can't be guaranteed to be maintained once people start digging in and changing things in their backyards. It could easily alter the flow of drainage. So I think that, again, you run into another issue that isn't controllable and isn't consistent with the original design that was approved by the State Water Board. So I think overall, I think Melissa's comments about history are extremely important. The conditions that were placed on the in the setback, not the first 25 feet, but the second 25 feet, which I also understand, that was part of a bigger picture and there was a reason for it. And it created part of the balance in this development as a way to mitigate its impact on the community and the sensitive habitat. And I think going back and changing that is a violation of a very long-term negotiation and approval process in terms of how this was going to impact our community. I guess that's about it. I really oppose this amendment. I don't oppose people wanting to use their backyards. Unfortunately, I think this set of backyards were not installed and designed to accommodate the kinds of installations that homeowners want. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Has Rick spoken before or?
No.
Why don't we have him speak next?
Sure. Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm here with my wife, Susan Whitney, and I would like to ask Susan for her comments first, and then I have a couple of comments. So Susan?
So I was the one that wrote the letter addressing the ADU issue. And I agree with the prior, Melissa and the person before me, I'm sorry, forgot her name. We've been here for 25 years and as we all know, or maybe some of you know or don't know, there was a 10-year negotiation for this, property development. And we did reach this agreement, and I'm sad now that we have to renegotiate. There was a setback agreement for reasons. And now, I can understand. Well, I can't really understand. I don't think I have 25 feet behind my property. And so I don't really understand the reasoning behind needing, more than that. They bought the property knowing what the property setbacks were. So, there's that. And the whole idea of the fact that now the political climate has changed. And if we change the setbacks and then allow this encroachment into the creek with the addition of the climate of adding ADUs, I'm not sure that Larkspur will have the ability to even control the building in that environment once you have granted them this right to encroach. So I am opposed to this encroachment. Thank you.
Okay, great. This is Rick speaking. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you all and the other folks who offered their comments. So one of the things that has not been discussed is, and maybe you can explain, as these additional structures are, possibly added, let's say there is an approval, with the assumption that there is an approval to reduce the setback from 50 feet to 25 feet. I think it's fair to assume that with any additional structure that might be built into that additional 25 feet of
Rick, just I'd like the planner to confirm this, but the setbacks are not changing.
Really? Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess to be clear, and let's make sure we're clear.
Okay.
There's no real, I'm not sure the word encroachment, but they are keeping the rear yards are about 25 feet in depth.
Yeah.
And there's no change to that. So there's no expansion of the rear yard spaces. It's just the use of the rear yard spaces. I think most understand that. I just think we want to be clear.
Right.
And there is a setback. Right now, there's a setback that prohibits any impervious surface that goes all the way into those rear yards up to the back of the homes. So what they're requesting is to have that match the, it's to have that match the fence line. And then to keep a 50-foot setback for the primary homes. So the homes all remain restricted to their current line of development.
Yeah, I get that, Neil. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no confusion on my part as it relates to that. But here's the thing, is that independent of making any change or addition to the primary home, that's not to say that a property owner can't add other structures, and those other structures can potentially have enormous impact in terms of flow, in terms of the appropriate, in terms of mitigating or not mitigating flow toward the creek. I don't know if you all are aware, but this creek bank nearly was at its crest just a couple of weeks ago during the storm that we had, the one before last. And well, here's the thing, if you were to raise the creek bank on the opposite side, I don't know my east from my west, but let's say the Rose Lane side, the Rose neighborhood side, raise that. That is absolutely going to increase the flow of water into the creek. And it will have the risk of flooding on this side of the creek. So I would ask for your comments about that.
Just to reiterate, it's not, the land is not changing, it's not being raised. But I understand your concerns.
Yeah. But Brocky, how do you know that with certainty? I mean, if you're adding structure, what's to prevent that area underneath the structure, around that structure, from being raised? And that's going to, effectively it raises the creek bank on that side of the creek. Do you understand what I'm saying? No? Yeah.
I think so.
All right. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think we should probably let other people talk, and
okay.
Yeah. You know where I live, so.
Yes, I do.
All right, thanks.
Well, what are the thoughts of the other folks?
The site is not, it's not currently in a flood zone. Now sea level rise, and I'll kind of respond to that. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a hydraulic engineer, so bear with me, but the site is not within, it was built to be and surcharged and raised to be above flood zone level. So the site is kind of built at its grade. Certainly sea level rise or storm events can become more severe. I think that's a concern for anyone. But the thing I would like to also clarify, I think there were comments that the site drainage was designed in a way that all this rear yard line, the 25 feet of the rear yards that separates to the vegetative buffer, is within what's considered the treated area of the storm drainage that goes out to the treatment retention pond. That was all taken into consideration as a whole.
Yeah.
There was no distinction of whether or not those surfaces were impervious or not. There's no application of all the specifics of all the structures, all the patios, and everything that would occur throughout the site. There's certain assumptions made in the
right. But Neil, so I just want to be clear, Neil. So are you saying that the addition of pervious structures you don't think would have an effect on the flow of water? No.
I can't speculate on exactly how that would affect the flow of the water in an extreme flooding event.
Right. Okay. So what's the next step then?
Well, why don't we hear out some of the other people, and then we'll talk about it and see where it goes.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you, Rick. Chris Wheaton, see the next.
Yeah, this is Chris Wheaton. My partner Heidi Scoble was going to comment from my computer. Hold on one second.
Hi, my name is Heidi Scoble. I'm not quite sure if this is the correct time to speak, but would there be an opportunity to provide a rebuttal to some of the comments that we've heard tonight? There just may be some, inconsistent or misinformation that's out there, and I would like the opportunity to speak to it when the time is appropriate.
Why don't we hear what all the other people have to say, and you can raise your hand right toward the end?
Fantastic. Thank you.
Does
We'll
that
do
work
that.
for you?
Yeah, that'll work. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see. Rick is the next person.
No, Rick just spoke.
Oh, that's right. Dave K.
Dave, you're allowed to talk. He's a phone number, so he may,
Oh,
Thank you. Can you hear me?
yeah.
yes.
Excellent. My name is Dave Cantor. I live at 67 Heather Way. Brock, I also know where you live,
Yes, you do.
just for the record. Most of what people have said, I am opposed to this proposal. I understand. I have profound empathy for this request. I get it. You've got this area in the back of the yard. Why can't we just use it? But I'm really speaking mostly on behalf of my mother-in-law, who is no longer with us, but who worked tirelessly with getting these, with the negotiation that went on to allow this sort of 61 units in this smallish space. And I would echo what I heard Melissa Dawson say earlier about this is kind of a betrayal of the recommendation that was made. It does, it's why there's no entry into the property from Ward Street, for instance. I think you have to take into consideration the neighborhoods around this neighborhood, and not only the needs of these particular neighbors. I'm worried about future owners. I mean, even if all of you are on board, and I'm great to hear that you are, I'm worried about what future owners or HOA leaders that might not be aligned to these goals might do, and the slippery slope that might occur from allowing, this little exemption now, a wink and a nod, but then later, who knows? Somebody 10 years down the road might say, oh, well, yeah, I'm going to build this big swimming pool in my backyard, and I have the right to because of the decisions that were made here this week today. The last thing I want to point out is, as far as I can tell, Marin, Larkspur, and Marin County in generally when these issues come up, tend to err on the side of the protection of the environment. And that is, you can see that going on in the actions taken against Smalley's Bay Oyster Company in West Marin, the prevention of additional development in Tennessee Valley, King Mountain. They were going to build 900 units near Larkspur Landing, and that was rejected by the city just a few years ago. So, I think that these are the values that the town stands for, and I would sort of hope that, again, with absolutely no malice whatsoever towards, I'm sure these are lovely people in the Rose Garden, I think that we have to stay on the side of opposing this exception. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I see a telephone number.
It's 924-1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. I think it would be reasonable and prudent for the definition of permitted accessory structures in this rather unique area to be customized and refined somewhat to reflect, to conform more closely to the intent as stated by the applicants in the application. As the old legal drafting maxim goes, when in doubt, spell it out. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Julie?
Thank you. Thank you. I wanted to quickly point out the issue here is the pervious versus impervious surface. As to structures that can be put on that surface, I want to assure people that there are regulations within the HOA. There is an architectural or design review organization committee that looks at it. It's not the Wild West, and so there are reasonable controls that will continue to exist from owner to owner regarding what can be done on the surface. It's just a question of whether that surface needs to be gravel or can be some other kind of material. That's a very simplistic way to put it, but I think we've lost our focus. We're talking about the surface, the foundation, not what is built on it. That's already subject to certain regulations, even if the town doesn't have permitting authority.
Thank you, Julie. I think James still has his hand up. Okay. Chris?
Yeah, I think that's the last hand up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again. My name is Heidi Scoble and I live with Chris Wheaton at 53 Rose Lane. I'd like to start off by thanking the city staff for working with the subdivision on this application. I want to bring back the impetus to this application, which started probably about 7 years ago when the residents started moving into the subdivision. And we realized that what was originally presented and approved to this Larkspur City Council and Planning Commission wasn't actually what was constructed once the project was approved. So if this project actually was constructed as originally permitted, we the homeowners wouldn't be here asking for this exception. But during the construction and improvement plan process, the grades along the creekside properties were elevated and the soils were compacted and new drainage systems were actually designed right up from the 25-foot fence line towards Rose Lane. So it changed the circumstances related to this development. But for that changed circumstance, again, we wouldn't be here, but because now we're dealing with a condition that's basically allows for an impervious surface, we're just asking for this exception. I wanted to bring up a couple items that were addressed during the public comment relating to the environmental impacts and special status species. There was a report by WRA that's, I believe, included in the staff report, and that's a biological assessment firm that identified what the impacts of what we're asking for would be on the creek and any type of sensitive status species. And it was determined that there would be no impact to the environment. Again, we're not proposing to construct anything from the fence line towards the creek. And I'd like to point out that if an applicant were to be allowed to build something within their rear yard setback, depending on what's being proposed, there would still be a subsequent building permit review that would be required. And during that review, it would be determined, whether or not additional drainage provisions would need to be incorporated into any type of project. They'd identify what kind of impacts would be within that general area. They would also assess whether or not the project would be consistent with the City of Larkspur development standards. So just because a project may be approved as part of this application doesn't mean that, there could be unintended consequences associated with the application or permit or structure that's permitted back there, just because the city staff does have the opportunity to review it. I'd like to address the original NPDS permit that was part of the original subdivision. Again, the city's improvement plans that allowed for the grading of the site and the installation of the infrastructure and the roads were part of that permit. And that permit included our existing as-built condition, which is very different from the condition that was presented to the city council when this class was originally approved. So again, you have to consider that, yes, what was approved had a meaning at that time, but once the permits were issued to allow for the infrastructure related to the subdivision to go in, it changed that circumstance. And so drainage is met, and regardless of what goes back in those yards, there are French drains that are installed, and those drains will go into the city street and go to the detention basin that was designed as part of the project. So I also wanted to identify that what we're requesting doesn't require any type of additional permitting from the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Department of Fish and Wildlife Services, the Army Corps of Engineers. We're just asking to be able to utilize improved surfaces within our backyards that we're using today. We're just not allowed to make other types of improvements that other people within the homeowners association have the benefit of having. So again, if the circumstances hadn't changed regarding the original approval process, the Creekside homeowners wouldn't be here, but the as-built conditions did change, and we're just requesting reconsideration of that original condition. So I really thank you for your time, and I really appreciate the staff for working with the Creekside homeowners, and I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
No, I think we're fine. Thanks, Chris. Let's see. Has everybody spoken that wants to speak, or they're still? I think that's still James' hand up. Okay. I don't see any other hands. Do you, Kristen?
No, I see no more hands up. I lowered James's hand, assuming that he had left it up by accident.
Okay.
Oh, we have a new hand up. Karen.
Not a new hand, it's Karen. Karen is
sorry.
requesting.
Hand is-
I've allowed her to talk.
Hi,
Please be brief.
I just wanted to reiterate that Mr. Toft himself said that many things could happen in those backyards that would not be subject to city review or permitting. The homeowners association cannot be relied upon to represent the interest of the community and environment to, if they think that's going to be an adequate review process, it's not. And further, I do think this requires an evaluation by an engineer before you can say that it doesn't trigger review by the state water quality control board. You don't know that until you do the calculations. And the NPDES permit does need to be looked at again. The changes, there were a whole bunch of violations of the permit during the construction process, and that was part of the reason for some of the changes that occurred. You can go look at the state records. There's a whole bunch of violations listed there that were required mitigation and changes in the construction process over time. So it's not redundant. It's not a second thought. It was done in order to meet standards and regulations set forth by the state. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. I see no other hands up. You see anything?
No.
I'm going to bring it back to the commission and ask that Jeff go first.
Alrighty. So, while I'm a usually very sympathetic person to homeowners and their ability to, do with their property what is reasonable and not accept, obviously within the rules. I guess I'm very sympathetic to Mr. Krasnoff and Ms. Ellingbo regarding the concept of the intent of the development when it was made, and the high bar that had to be achieved in order to do the project. So I think that the individuals who bought these houses obviously knew, and I am sympathetic to Mrs. Wheaton, who says that it wasn't exactly what they were presented. But despite that, I really do think that until some engineer, as Ms. Ellingbo says, or a hydrologist looks at this plan, I would have a hard time approving.
Thank you, Jeff. Daniel?
Yeah, thank you. This has turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it was going to be when I first read the report. So on the surface, the request appears to be reasonable, and I figured I'm going to do the Dr. Anthony Fauci approach and try to follow the science as it's been presented, and the NWRA did present some of that. However, this is a big however. We're looking about writing essentially into municipal law a backpedaling of what was agreed upon when the development was first designed and then later built. And I do recognize that there were changes after the fact, but I don't really think that they necessarily negate what the intent was of the original agreement. and I do appreciate that that the neighborhood, the Rose Garden development, has an active and thoughtful homeowners association, but I think it would be a mistake for the city to have the HOA sort of stand in for its own authority, and that would make me somewhat uncomfortable. With regard to the WRA report, and they're environmental consultants. I am not one. However, I'd say there's somewhat of a speculative component to it, where it's essentially, well, there's no evidence that this will actually result in runoff and endanger the creek, and I understand why they make that conclusion. But can we really, in fact, verify this, particularly if there are a bunch of impermeable structures that go up along that north-south stretch of the creek? And that was a little bit the impetus for my question earlier this evening about, well, there's why does the surface necessarily need to be impervious in order to really obtain the result that some of the homeowners would like, in terms of, let's say, constructing a patio, since there are porous materials which are available, and that might be helpful. Um, um, so I just think that this might go a step too far in generalizing essentially a backpedaling of the original agreement. Um, if it were specific to that, to the one property, I might come up with I'm not sure, but I might come up with a different conclusion. But here we're sort of casting something in stone, which we might later come to regret. And that's the reason for my hesitation on this.
Thank you.
No. Just to be clear, our adjudication this evening is actually not an adjudication. It's more of it's an advisory. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
As an advisory consideration, these sort of the context of whatever objections that any commissioners might have, that will be included in the record for the city council, as opposed to just a simple thumbs up or thumbs down. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, say that, ask that.
Well, that the reasoning, essentially what we are saying is sort of part of the advisory, as opposed to simply a thumbs up or thumbs down. We recommend approval, we recommend not approving. That the context of what we're saying is, takes on a certain amount of poignancy, a certain amount of importance in this particular instance.
Well, I do think it would be helpful to have a vote that just really reflects what the recommendation of the commission is, even if it's split, and if there is any consensus on any recommendations for the project or information, you can add that in.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be hard to parse out comments per se, but I think if it was fashioned as part of a motion, that would be helpful.
Okay.
To the council.
With that in mind, there are certain elements of the request which I think would require clarification, particularly enclosed structures, and then, in addition to the sort of the definition of what an impervious surface actually means in this particular context.
Thank you, Daniel. My thoughts are that these people should be able to use their backyards in a way similar to other people. And on the other hand, I think I'm concerned, because the backyards are small, that you end up with a big ADU or a big Olympic-sized swimming pool or something like that. I know the homeowners association theoretically has some say over this. And there are impervious surfaces. I would try to keep the accessory structures to 120 feet, as they are in many other places. And also maybe there's a way to set how much impervious surface can be in a backyard. But I think they're being deprived of the use of their yards in the way that everybody else is able to use their yards. And I don't think it affects the creek. And I think the drainage can be studied and solved. So, and the reality is that the commission's the one that passed this initially, and maybe they're going to have to deal with it again. But I think for me, I can support what they're asking, just because I feel it's something that houses ought to have some access to using their yards. So, and I think also just from having watched the Rose Lane process through the planning, I could see where the developer went, whatever you guys want, we'll do. It was a 10-year process. It was forever. And I know there was a lot of public comment. I participated to some degree, and that's my thoughts on it. I don't know if anybody else wants to add something to that, but
Well, I guess my question would be, well, how do we construct?
yeah, I think that's the difficulty.
Well, yeah, and let me, if I may, just because I think there's some items that have been became more of a focus than we anticipated. And one is, what is the difference between impervious versus permeable, and the definition? Like, impervious really means, I guess you've got permeable pavers, permeable surfaces, and then the question, you begin to get into nuances of, well, what meets a standard? If you prohibit impervious surfaces, then what is pervious exactly? And so if that's something that we want to try to define in the ordinance, and then regulate what kind of materials can go in there. We've tried to do that through, some level of listing of types of materials and so on. But when it comes to structure, and particularly, obviously someone can put out gravel, they can put out paver stones, but then how they treat it and whether they come back later and cement it in and things, it's always very challenging. When it comes to structures, if you're going to regulate according to a certain size, then that needs to be specified, and then that's a regulation that applies to these properties, versus what size might be allowed relative to the setbacks and the site coverage and things like that. So I'm trying to clarify if that in fact is the intent, is maybe rather than lifting the restriction, maybe your intent is to clarify the restriction.
Yeah, I
to
think
make it less.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Because that's kind of what I've been driving at, and I understand the challenge of trying to define what materials are acceptable and which materials aren't. But to the extent that we can in fact do that and ensure that that the surfaces, even in the presence of, let's say, a patio, remain permeable, remain pervious surfaces, well, then we don't run afoul of the original original plan for the rose garden. And then I think you're also right and say, well, it's a different kettle of fish when you're actually considering structures. I understand that, and then perhaps a definition of what would be would be acceptable, kinds of covered structures, it might be in order. Brock, what do you think of that?
I think that's good. I'm so glad you're going to make that motion.
Now, one other thing I'd like to clarify too for the board is that, again, the treatment, the drainage, and we do have this and the Public Works Director did in fact agree with WRA's conclusion based on the permit that was the NPDES permit that was issued for this project as regulated. He felt the conclusion was valid, in that the amount of potential surface runoff from this area would be negligible. And in fact, this area was included as captured runoff into the system. And none of the area was based upon what's necessarily pervious versus impermeable or not. So this setback was not technically an issue applied in the initial CEQA review of the class and or the analysis and the storm drainage design. So it's not changing that condition, assuming that whatever is developed within these limited yard spaces are similar and consistent with those developed through other yard spaces. Now, again, currently we don't regulate specifically all flat work. So if we don't have a way of issuing permits, it's very hard to regulate. So if standards are going to apply to features that are not necessarily regulated by building permit, it'll just have to be understood that these are, sort of zoning regulations and only enforceable through code enforcement.
I agree, but it's a hard one to put together. Do you want to take a crack at it, Daniel, and see what we want to do?
I will. Okay, so I would move that we make the following recommendation to the Larkspur City Council, and that is to reconsider the wording of the proposed amendments in order to ensure the permeability of the area within the setback under consideration, and also to specify what types of covered structure would be permitted, perhaps defined by some kind of a square footage standard. For example, 120 square feet of coverage. And I would propose, the motion would then propose to convey that wording to the city council.
Well, is that adequate, Neil?
I need you to repeat that slowly because I actually have to report that to city. We want to report your action to city council for their packet for next week.
Neil, I could reread it back to them because I think I got it, if you don't mind. Okay. Motion to reconsider the wording of the proposed amendments in order to ensure permeability of the area within the setback and specify what types of structures could be permitted, and include square footage, for example, 120 square feet for an accessory structure.
Was that correct, Daniel?
Yeah, that pretty much captures it.
Yeah, I think that will do it.
Okay, that's my motion.
Do we have a second? Jeff?
Yeah, sure, second.
Okay. Can we have a roll call on that?
I'll go. Vice Chair Kunstler,
I approve.
Commissioner Swisher,
I approve on that.
Chair Wagstaff.
Yes.
Okay.
There is a 10-day appeal period.
Well, actually, there's no appeal.
Actually,
It's
that's right.
advisory.
Yeah.
And we'll be bringing this matter to the city council next week on Wednesday night, December 1st.
Okay. Good. All right. Can we go to the next item, which is,
Thank you.
thank you. Let's see. Review 2133 for a property at 371 Via La Cumbre. Can we have the staff report?
Thank you. I'm going to keep this very brief. The applicants have requested a fence height exception to attempt to legalize a partially completed fence installed in their front yard setback. This matter was brought to the city's attention due to a code enforcement complaint filed by the GPOA, the Greenbrae Homeowners Association. Some of the major concerns with the fence expressed by the Homeowners Association was that it appeared to impair sight lines for the neighbor next door at 359 Via La Cumbre, and that it was incompatible with the neighborhood and exceeded the height limits. After that, the property owner worked with our Department of Public Works, who set some height limits in the front yard that he thought would ensure sight lines for 359 Via La Cumbre would be met. And the applicant revised their design and submitted a fence height exception, proposing fences that range from 42 inches above the existing retaining walls in their front yard to, I'm going to bring up the plan, to 48 inches where it extends in front of the house. They have proposed removing the fence that comes up next to 359 Via La Cumbre by the driveway and have proposed returning the 42-inch fence on top of the low retaining walls and curb in front of that abuts the street up around what they call the sunken garden on their site plan. So the sightline triangle will no longer be impaired with respect to a fence within the sightline triangle as it exists today with the framework you may have seen when you were in the field. But the Homeowners Association has continued to object to this fence, finding again in their letter that they believe it does not meet the fence height exception findings, that it is not compatible with the neighborhood, even at a lower height and revised layout, and that they believe it continues to impair sightlines for the neighbor at 359, even though it's proposed a little differently. So because of these objections, staff has put this matter before the Planning Commission as opposed to hearing it as a zoning administrator application. In visiting the site and looking at the site plan, it's fairly clear that this property has a pretty long exposure to the traffic in the street, and that there are other fences in the neighborhood in the immediate vicinity that do exceed 42 inches. They're just less visible because Via La Cumbre is a split design with one-way roads that are staggered above each other and a big median in the middle that blocks views of some of these homes. This particular lot is especially exposed, and what should be designed there, I think, needs careful thought just because of that exposure. But because of the layout and the fact that they don't really have much usable yard, it seems that some ability to make their front yard safer for their children and their dog is appropriate. So we did give you some options in the staff report to consider for revising the design that's proposed by the applicant if you do not believe the design is compatible with the neighborhood. If you do find it's compatible with the neighborhood as proposed, then we recommend you continue the application and to the following meeting in December and direct staff to prepare findings of approval. If you have concerns or you do not believe you can make the findings, then you need to continue the application as directed in the staff report and give us the appropriate direction. That concludes my report.
Does anybody have any questions for Kristen?
I do have some photos also of the,
Oh, Kristen, the diagram that you had up, who provided that diagram?
this is drawn by the property owner.
Okay.
She based it on, I believe, an old 1962 site plan.
Okay.
So I did state in the staff report that it isn't based on a site survey of existing conditions.
Yeah,
But
okay.
what we do know is the relationship of these walls and the fence to the roadway, and that's pretty much depicted on this diagram.
Great, thank you.
So Kristen, just to be clear, the fence that's already built, they're proposing stays the way it is. Is that right or not?
No, that fence is approximately 6 feet above grade and above retaining walls.
Yeah,
And as I understand it, per these sections, she's proposing that the section that's covered by AA here, can you see where I'm pointing
yeah,
out?
yeah.
Would be 57 inches to the bottom of the retaining wall and 48 inches to grade. When you get to where it steps forward towards the street more, Public Works required it be lower, and they proposed 42 inches above the wall or curb. It kind of varies in height because of the grade changes, as you can see here.
So how much are they lowering this?
So this fence is 6 feet. They're proposing it be 42 inches.
Right, and this
This
one,
fence is 6 feet. They're proposing it be 48 inches above this, above grade or this wall. I'm not exactly sure.
so from the street, it's, that wall's about 2 feet or 18
Right.
inches.
Yes.
And they're proposing how much above that? 48 inches?
48 inches right here where the wooden portion is.
Okay,
And 42 here where you see the green grass behind it
yeah.
as the fence steps forward.
Did
And
you
then-
happen to have a tape when you went out there? I didn't take a tape with me, so I don't know how high this is. It looks like it's about 6 feet.
The existing fence is about 6 feet,
Okay,
but they're proposing to modify it.
all right. Any other questions? Would the applicant like to make a presentation?
Deborah and Nancy, I'm allowing you to talk. You need to make sure you unmute. There we go.
Thank you, Kirsten. Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. I am Nancy Reed and my daughter Deborah Lutsky is here, and we have a few slides to share. The photo of the house, the photo on the left was taken in December of 2020, almost a year
Next
ago.
slide, please. Sorry. Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
Yeah, that was the house when we bought the house in 2009. So we just wanted to show what the house used to look like with all the vegetation in front of it. But Kristen, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide for us. Thank you.
The photo on the left was taken in December of 2020, almost a year ago. The photo on the right is a rendering with the green dashed line, which represents where we would like the fence height reduced to 48 inches and 42 inches respectively. And of course, we will add native drought tolerant plants. We started working on the fence in May of 2020. At this time, we had no idea that there were any concerns. Later, we learned the HOA filed a complaint with the city around May of 2020 and submitted a second complaint a year later. We only learned about the complaint when the city notified us in June of 2021. We wish somebody had told us sooner. The fence was never intended to be the height you see it today. As you see, the lumber remains in stock dimensions. It is all uncut, including posts and fence balusters. We were trying to determine the appropriate height before cutting it down to size. Next slide, please. What you see here is a brief timeline of the application submittal process to the city of Larkspur. Once we were notified on the issue in June of 2021, we immediately reached out to the planning department and to the city engineer to resolve any safety issues related to roadway traffic and the neighbor's line of sight. There are links here to our application. The city allows fences up to 42 inches in height without a permit. Without restrictions, however, we opted to submit an application to request an additional 6 inches. Next slide, please. The graphic here is the original fence plan that we submitted 1 month after the first hearing from the city and following the site visit with the engineer to establish a safe height for the fence to ensure that there would be no impact to the neighboring property or the roadway traffic. The city engineer established the height of the fence that curves around the property at 42 inches, measured from the top of the highest wall, the sightline triangle, which we will not build within. He directed us to change the curve of the fence around the property, realigning the fence closer to the outdoor patio. We took all the design requirements set forth by the city engineer and reflected them in our initial plan submittal. Nothing will be built within the sightline triangle. Next slide, please. The plan you see has not changed from the original submittal. Clarifications were made, but no design changes requested. The design, location, and height of the fence has not changed since the original submittal. We were not requested to submit any design, height, or location changes to the fence by the planning staff or and the city engineer. And I should mention that the design was formally accepted by the city engineer. The fence height you see on the plans are not what you see currently outside the home. We are requesting a 48-inch height in front of the home and the children's bedroom windows. Windows, and to drop the fence height even further to 42 inches, transitioning at the green circle that you see here. As we understand from the city, we are requesting a fence height exception for only the 6 inches above, which is allowed without a permit. Those 6 inches in front of the children's windows are critical as they will block the line of sight from parked cars, vehicular traffic, bicyclists, and pedestrians outside. This is a heavily trafficked road, especially during commute hours. Next slide, please. And skip the next slide.
If you don't mind. Thank you.
These are the original drawings from the home in 1960, and we just wanted to share with them. Thank you. Next slide, please. These are the neighborhood support letters. We have full support from all our neighbors. We noticed that one of the homeowners' support letters was missing from the commissioner's package, but it has been on the city website for a few months. All the support letters are included here in this graphic. We spoke again to our neighbors yesterday who continue to express their support for our fence. We have received tremendous support from other neighbors and passerbys. Next slide, please. We have mentioned the site height line established by the city engineer, which addresses the sight line and roadway safety concerns. The line marked here on the fence with the white arrow was established by the city engineer himself. This portion of the fence is 42 inches in height as measured from the top of the planter wall. And as I mentioned, this height was set by the city engineer to remedy any safety concerns. We have spoken at length to the police department regarding significant safety issues, which is why we have asked for a fence. Neighbors have been robbed, including us, properties damaged, and there have been serious accidents. The traffic is high speed and there was a shooting on Via La Cumbre. Also, cars regularly park outside the girls' bedrooms in front of our home, and we want to prevent anyone from looking into their bedrooms. Next slide. We submitted findings to city planning on 8/10/21. Next slide. We submitted our plans to GPOA on August 25th, 2021. However, as you can see in the letter they sent directly to the city, they do not support this project. We feel very challenged by their surprise letter as they did not give us an opportunity to address any concerns they brought up in the letter, with the exception of the safety issue, which had been resolved prior to the initial application for the city. Next slide, drawings. The HOA raised some concerns and we can respond to you if you'd like to discuss. Next slide, please. Exceptional circumstances. The HOA states they do not see any exception circumstances, but does not provide any detail. However, the staff report identifies a number of exceptional circumstances, including a steep slope, triangular parcel, and a curved frontage. The curved lot there's only 7% of the lots in the subdivision that are curved. There's a front yard, there's downstairs children's bedrooms facing the street, there's high-speed traffic and volume. Next slide. The CC&Rs, the city allows for fences up to 42 inches without a permit. We are requesting an additional 6 inches above what the city has said we can build on our property. Also, upon review of the CC&Rs, fences up to 6 feet are allowed, or up to 7 feet if the fence encloses an outdoor patio or living spaces, which we are doing. If you look around Greenbrae, there are a hodgepodge of fences with varying designs: vertical, horizontal, slats, modern, contemporary, mid-century, and even wire fencing. And most homes have fences, hedges, or other dividing instrumentalities as discussed in the CC&Rs. My family has lived here in Greenbrae since the 1960s, and we've always had fences. So have our neighbors. Looking around, that is quite apparent. Next slide, please.
So we want to talk a little bit about how commonplace fences are in the neighborhood. Once we heard from the GPOA that they were opposed to our fence, which surprised us, we decided to take a drive around the neighborhood of places that were part of the GPOA. And so the majority of the surrounding properties do have fences, hedges, and dividing instrumentalities and retaining walls. We put this graphic together just to kind of represent in our general vicinity how many fences do or hedges do exist. About 85% of all of the homes in Greenbrae in this area have one of these items we're being told we can't have here at our property. Also, the GPOA said that by allowing a fence here, it would set precedent. But as noted in the staff report as well, many of the homes in the area do actually have fences.
Next slide, please.
So we just went out and took photos. We wanted to show you what the neighborhood looks like. This just happens to be our block. There are so many fences here, different types of dividing instrumentalities, retaining walls, and the like. In the bottom right corner, we actually kind of mimicked our design of the fence off of this one that existed because we thought it was quite beautiful. Next slide, please. More fences. This is our block and a ridge over Greenbrae. There are just a tremendous number of tall fences, short fences, wire fences. You can see people in Greenbrae have fences to protect their yards and their homes. Next slide, please. And actually this beautiful fence, if you can see it, is 2 Los Cerros Way. I actually spoke with Lee this morning and she was kind enough to share with me about her fence height exception approval and the design review process she went through. The GPOA had her go through a formal design review board and provided feedback and actually supported her project. She has a curved lot just like we do, and it wraps all the way around her property. She was also kind enough to suggest that I bring up her project tonight at Planning Commission. I have her agreement to do that. And she said from what I described of the project, she actually supported it as well. Clearly, the CC&Rs haven't changed in 50 years, and there are fences everywhere in Greenbrae. And of course, as the city allows 42-inch fences, we're hopeful that our fence can exist at the 42 and 48-inch height. Next slide, please. Another concern that came up was safety. And so I just wanted to share some clippings over the years. I've been here long enough that, you know, a lot has happened. If you remember the gentleman who was shot, he was shot on my street. There was a tremendous amount of crime that actually surrounded that. He survived, thankfully, but it was a really traumatic event. There was also a crash victim that the crash that happened on our street where a woman was pinned between a Porsche and another car. She nearly died. I also put a graphic up, a photo I took myself when a car at a high rate of traffic actually careened into the house across the street. And if it hadn't been for the barriers, the fence, and the concrete wall there, they would have driven into the house. And 2 little girls lived there. I mean, I myself have 2 little girls. So, you know, obviously I'm concerned based on how high a volume the traffic is in this area and the amount of crime we're having. Next slide, please. The last point that the GPOA brought up of their concern was how height is measured. We went by the city code and the requirements set forth. So we're hopeful that this concern can be alleviated. I just have 2 more slides. So the one point that I think that we wanted to share with you is just to show that there's a parking lane outside the house. I think that that's missed a lot of times. We have a wide road here. I don't know what the legislated road is. I think it's over 40 feet. I could pull the subdivision maps. But what we wanted to show is that like people park in front of the house. You can see the large truck that parks there all the time. There's always a car here. All of the Google Maps always show a car parked in front of the house. And those are the girls' bedroom windows directly adjacent to the passenger window, where we're asking to bring the fence down to 48 inches. We know this is a large car, but that 6 inches is critical because as you can see, the driver's line of sight is directly into those windows, directly into those bedrooms. And we know this is a large truck, so we're hopeful with regular sized cars that do tend to park there, it will just obscure them from looking into the girls' bedroom windows if the blinds are drawn. Next slide, please. And then we wanted to show the significant road elevation change, and something we talked about with the city engineer is that there is a significant elevation change here. And that's why the fence he actually told me how to design it and how to put it on the plans. My mom's a landscape architect. She drew the plans. She was a former drafter. So we did hand draw the plans. And I know that was a concern of the HOA, but we wanted to kind of just go through this project with you to give you an idea of why we were asking for, a 6-inch variance to the fence. And we're hopeful you can support it. And we really appreciate your time tonight. So thank you for listening.
Thank you both very much. I think there's a couple other people that have their hands up.
Brock, do you mind if I clarify something about fence height really quickly? I'm going to go back to the proposed drawing. Fence height is measured from the top of the fence to grade, but when it abuts a retaining wall or is placed within 12 inches of a retaining wall, fence height is measured from the top of the fence to the bottom of the adjacent wall. That's why we're giving you two heights on these sections. It's 48 inches from the grade to the top of the fence, but if you were to measure to the bottom of the first retaining wall, it's 57 inches. Same with this particular fence in section BB. It's taller when you measure from the top of the fence to the bottom of the wall, and it varies in height because the wall varies in height, but it's 42 inches above the wall. I just want to make that clear.
And it's actually 48 inches, if I'm understanding what they said correctly.
Oh, that's section AA, but
they wanted
section
inches
BB
higher.
is 42.
Okay.
Section BB would be the area in front of the sunken garden.
This area here.
As it goes up the hill towards 359.
Yeah.
This is 42. This
Okay.
section is 48 above the wall. It's still taller when you measure to the bottom of the wall.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, is there anybody else who would like to speak on this item?
I note the applicant's hand is up. I don't know if that's because she wants to respond again.
No, thank you. It was to be able to speak earlier. I appreciate it.
All right. Jack, I've allowed you to talk.
Hello?
Oh, I guess it's Mark.
Yeah, it's Mark.
Sorry.
Okay.
I live right across the street, in fact, directly across the street from the residence here, and I'm at 380 Villa Cumbre. I actually, just to back up a little, I actually grew up on the street with spending summers at my cousin, he's a former sheriff, Wyman Tong, right down the road. And I have also served on a couple homeowners associations. So when I noticed that there was a house available in Greenbrae and Villa Cumbre, I immediately jumped on it. And one of the big things was just the fact that what Deborah had mentioned was the fact that not all houses are the same here, and you can really kind of make it your own here, which I really appreciated. What I will say though is that because we're the ones that can see directly across from the residents here, so for one, this isn't the most important part, but I can see the fence, and actually it looks a lot better in terms of looking directly across the street. I'm always looking out the window, but here's the thing that really that I think is a big concern. I have a daughter who's now 2.5. Ever since she was 6 months old, I would take her outside and I'd walk down the street, typically during rush hour traffic. I am appalled, absolutely appalled at how fast traffic comes through here. It is super dangerous. And look, to add 6 inches to a wall to protect 2 girls of the same age as my daughter, I have to say, whatever you need to do, that's exactly pertinent. The other thing I'll add too is the fact that I see people parking in front of our residence and across the street at their residence, and they're not people that live here, and they're people that, quite frankly, when I walk by there with my daughter, I cringe. I don't want them looking at my daughter, let alone looking in my daughter's room for that matter. So looking at those two things and looking at the fact that, you know, we're really looking at the fact that it's really about principle here. And I really don't get all the ins and outs of that. And I'm even looking out the window right now and looking at the next door neighbor, you know, her view of sight. And oh yes, you know, adding 6 inches to this wall will block her line of sight if she's looking at the pavement on the street. So I am strongly for raising this height to make it safe for this family, because in addition to that, they do not have a lot of outdoor space. We have plenty of outdoor space here. It's almost like, you know, forcing us to put a very low barrier on our backyard. It's just the same way. This is the only outdoor space that this family has. So again, I feel like I moved to Greenbrae for the reasons that we can kind of do what's tasteful, which this fence is absolutely tasteful, and do the things we want for our houses that make sense for our families. So again, I live right across the street. I have clear line of sight to that. I like it better aesthetically that I can see the fence, you know, rather directly into their windows.
Thank you, Mark. We have one other hand up.
Jack Valinati, you may speak. You need to, there we go.
Hi, good evening. This is Jack Valinati. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much for allowing me to speak tonight. I do appreciate everybody's thoughtful consideration of this issue. Really would like to clear one thing up. No one's talking about aesthetics. No one's talking about denying somebody the right to preserve their property, protect their children. No one's trying to prevent anybody from using their usable space. Is that clear? So we're not, as the GPOA stands, our opinion is a neighbor called us at 3:59 and complained about something that had started. I'm glad the presentation accurately included how long the fence has been up. And the applicant didn't include my September communications to them, which got ignored for a month, and tried to create a perception that the GPOA wasn't responsive between the end of August and the beginning of November. That's incorrect. Simply incorrect. The concepts that the GPOA is concerned about are safety, primarily safety. The safety triangle, the 15-foot window, is not the concern. The concern is the area in AA where that truck was parked. That's a 6-foot tall truck. And so when the resident at 359 backs out of her driveway, she's not going to be able to see that truck. And when that truck comes around the corner, when it's traveling, everybody's acknowledging incredibly here to you tonight how fast cars travel. Well, that's a reality we're all trying to deal with. So's the neighbor at 359. She's not going to be able to back out of her property because she's not going to see a car coming around that turn before that car is within 15 feet. It's not going to be able to stop. Incredibly, Brandy Young's complaining, objecting to this design wasn't included in the package of materials that you have. Not quite sure why that happened. The materials that I saw tonight for the first time weren't presented to the GPOA. The presentation that was done about the fences, none of them are on corners like this property is. None of them are over almost 6 feet in height. And I'd like to speak as well to the point about the 48 inches. Mystifies me. We use the word impossible in our letter. Can't really tell how tall the fence is going to be. We don't really know how tall the fence is going to be. There's 25 inches of curbing that was installed by the homeowner, the applicant. That doesn't exist in other properties. So you're adding 25 plus 48. That's what's being asked for here as I see it, 25 plus 48. If that's not right, then the plans aren't clear. So the concern that has been expressed about how other people are doing it, other people came to the GPOA before they constructed their fence. The GPOA worked with them to honor the 10-foot front yard setback. The little squib that was presented about the CC&Rs didn't quote the portion that says nothing can be placed in the setback. This setback here has not even been considered to be honored, the front yard setback 10 feet. This fence is right on the edge of the gutter. That's what it's called. And then added 25 feet and then on top of. Again, no one's objecting to aesthetics. That's not what we talk about. We don't care. We're not telling people plant the white picket fence you saw. Don't plant the Carmel or Santa Barbara fence. Don't plant this fence. It's not about design. No one's imposing anybody's aesthetic on anybody. It's about safety. Yes, I understand people shouldn't be allowed to peep into windows. Yes, I know Jay Leone, the gentleman who's been shot. I know he got broken into. We're not saying don't protect yourself and don't protect your property. But when you look at the other slide of the car coming up with the fence constructed, there's no way that car or 359 is going to be able to see each other coming around that turn. It's just not going to happen. You see where that arrow is? Thank you for that. And I think this is a corner. I think you should be looking at this as a corner property because an uphill and a downhill meet, and there's no stop sign there. So the one on Los Cerros that was pointed out, there's a stop sign at that corner and traffic can either go straight or traffic can go to the right. This different kind of intersection altogether. And I understand in the picture that we're seeing right now that the fencing abutting the driveway is going to be pulled back to observe the 15-foot. That's wonderful. It's great. Nobody objects to that. It's the downhill. It's the portion being able to see underneath that terrace that's there so that they can see cars coming around the corner before they get to that arrow that you see in that picture. That's it. It's a safety concern. GPOA wasn't consulted before the fence was built. Fence has been up since at least August of 2020, the first time that the GPOA was contacted by a homeowner who expressed very simply a safety concern. I can't get out of my driveway and feel safe. That's all. These are homeowner constructed add-ons to the curbing there to build a planter box. Beautiful, love it. You know, drought tolerant succulents, wonderful. Not for me to say. We're not talking about design aesthetics. We're not talking about telling people what to do with the fences they put up, whether they be slats or wrought iron or concrete boulders. I don't care. It doesn't matter. We're not concerned with aesthetics. We're concerned about safety. And that's the primary concern. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I see one other hand up.
I believe Mark Pfeiffer. Mark, you've been allowed to speak. You need to unmute.
Okay. I'm Deborah Lutsky's father. I'm up in Washington State. I suggest that maybe the resolution to this whole thing, Jack kind of brought it out. How about we just put a stop sign right there at that corner? A stop sign or at least a yield sign, but preferably a stop sign over in that area where that white arrow was painted. And maybe a speed hump or a speed bump. Those would be engineered solutions to the problem, because you're not, we've got some conflicting concerns, but a stop sign right here, that would do it. Thank you.
Thank you. We have, who haven't we?
We still have hands up, but everybody has spoken. Does anyone want to remove their hand, or are you asking to speak again? So Mark,
maybe have Mark speak first.
Didn't he just speak?
Yes, he did.
Mark, are you still intending to speak?
I'm sorry. No, I'm finished. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
I'm going to lower his hand for him manually.
Okay, Deborah and Nancy, would you like to follow up?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to clarify one point about working with the city engineer. I mean, obviously, he's a transportation expert, and he is a registered engineer. And so the concern that Mr. Valinati brought up, we absolutely agree. Safety is a tremendous issue. And we spoke to Brandy just 2 days ago to talk through the issue with her. And she said, you know, if it's been vetted by the city engineer, you know, as long as it's safe for her to back out. And that's why we worked so closely with the city engineer. And he actually designed the fence for us. I just really wanted to put that forward, is that we worked with the Department of Public Works as city engineer specifically. He met me on site and he told me where the line of sight challenges were because it is one-way traffic and it curves around the lot, where the fence needed to be brought down to what level. And he actually gave me that line. We marked it on the fence that day. And I want to say that safety is a primary concern. I know everyone in the neighborhood says this, but it really is. It's so much so I've talked with the city engineer about putting speed bumps in front of the house or speed humps. I know that in Marin, we're very cautious about what term we use. But I did call the county and I have requested stop signs as well. And they're going to be agendizing that next month to put in stop signs at the end of the block on their property, because this is such a big deal. I mean, I've gone above and beyond to really make sure that we've done everything we can to make this safe. So I do want everyone to know that like this safety it was the primary driver in the design, and that's why we landed where we landed. So thank you for your time again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, is everybody, I see Jack again, is that?
Jack, did you want to speak again or?
Yes, just very briefly. I don't know how to refer to it in your materials, but it's the diagram that's the page after the July 7, 2021 email. I guess it's from Alvin Tan. Yeah, that one. So the 15-foot triangle where that black line or that blue line is, that triangle works great from the X back to the edge of that triangle, the hypotenuse of that triangle. But how does somebody see from the circle that's back on Villa La Cumbre through the fence to see that triangle? Somebody's not going to be able to do that no matter how tall a fence is or isn't. Where a car coming from that circle is not going to be able to see in that black line. And that's the concern. Even if they followed the red line to the X, look where the sight line goes through. It goes through two portions of a fence. And so the driver's got an impairment. The bigger impairment is backing out of 359. And with all due respect to Mr. Skinner, I don't think Mr. Skinner got in a car and backed out of that driveway and tried to pull out. And that's what needs to be done to see whether anything can be built that would safely allow that car to be able to back out. And that's the primary, that's number one on the required findings. That's why it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the commission, and I will ask Daniel this time to start with his thoughts.
Yeah, I was afraid of that. Yeah, this one also it's kind of a tough one, and I certainly would not dispute the desirability of having a fence as a protective measure for this home and for the children residing in it, and I've no objection to the fence being within the setback either. However, I am concerned about the actual height of the fence, and as was very clearly spelled out on page 4 of the report. The city ordinance 18.08.297 sets the guidelines for a fence height exception, And points 4 and 5, the height and design of the fence will be compatible with the scale, mass, and architectural character structure of the neighborhood. And number 5, the fence height will not significantly visually obstruct or reduce the openness of the street scene. Neither of those conditions are actually met in the current design. I understand the need, particularly in this particular situation, for some flexibility, um, but from there to going as high as 58 inches as specified on the diagram that was shown, I don't think I can quite get there. Does it have to be, down to the letter, 42 inches from the bottom of the retaining structure? Well, perhaps not. I could probably easily see my way clear to something a bit higher than that. But as it stands now, I still think it's a bit too much. With regard to the safety measures for the next door neighbor, I believe it's 359. That is a concern, and I think Mr. Valenti did point out that the sight lines will still be somewhat impaired to some extent. To some extent, it's something that might have to be lived with in order to allow safety precautions at 371. But perhaps some further modifications might work to the satisfaction of both homeowners. And then obviously it's beyond the scope of our mandate to put into the motion any kind of measures such as a stop sign or speed humps or mirrors or anything like that. That would be a separate issue, which is beyond our authority this evening. So those are my thoughts. I think I would favor some modification to this design.
Thank you, Daniel. Jeffrey?
I was thinking of Robert Frost, good fences make good neighbors. But I don't like the design of the fence as it currently exists. It looks, obviously like a stockade. And I understand that it's incomplete at the top. Looking at this, that backing out of 359 looks terrifying. And I think that the fence as designed here would make it slightly more terrifying, but I'm not sure that even if there was no fence, it would still not be a great place to back, out of at all. So I agree with Daniel. I think there are some modifications that need to be made to improve this, which includes somehow decreasing the sense of bulk of that fence or changing the materials. And I understand that part of the problem is the see-through nature of it that Deborah is concerned about. But a lot of corner fences, and I live on a corner fence, had to be designed so that they were see-through, that you could see from one side to the other. And I think in this situation that I would require that to be the case. And then obviously put good window coverings inside your house to avoid that issue of people looking into your house. Anyway, that's what I think about it.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I'm having a difficult time with this one. I understand what the homeowner is trying to achieve. I'm afraid that anything that you would build that would protect the windows is also going to inhibit the sight line. It's just a product of that curve. And I think a stop sign is probably a good idea, or speed bump or something like that, but that's not where we are. Also, I think, and I'm not sure I understand what the exact design of the fence is in terms of whether there's a top cap or what, but it's pretty monolithic right now. And I think that sort of adds to the feeling of the view being affected as you drive around the corner. I know that street pretty well, and it has traffic issues at certain times of the day. I guess I would like to see the fence looked at again and modified somewhat. The retaining wall or the little curb really adds to the height. That's a reality. So you're talking about 48 inches plus a couple of feet, which means that from grade it's 6 feet. So anyway, I guess not sure where we take it from here? Would somebody want to make a motion to have them come back with some other revisions, or how do we want to go from here?
Kristen, would it, out of fairness to the applicant, would a denial without prejudice allow them to appeal to the city council?
Yes.
Okay, so we could, so I think I would ask the, Brock, I think I would ask the applicant whether that would be preferable to a continuance, but that's, I think I would pose the question to them.
Yeah, and if I can kind of weigh in on this, Commissioner, is I think the question to the applicant is, are they interested in considering any of your suggestions to make adjustments, or are they not? And that then informs the commission on whether or not it's worthwhile to continue the application, or take action for them to then appeal.
Can we ask the applicant to comment? Would they like to have an extension or have a denial without prejudice?
Hi, thank you for the opportunity. We would love to work with you to find a design that works. I don't think a denial would be the right avenue that we'd want to take. I mean, we did show the 2 Los Cerros curve property, but I would also like to ask if we can get the city engineer involved. I know safety is a concern and we need an expert on the matter. I mean, all of us are concerned about safety. I mean, I've heard it, I think, from the chairs and the commissioners here. Is there a way that we can work with the city engineer in coordination with doing a revised design that we can ensure that it's safe? Because I mean, that really is a challenge. We don't want it to be monolithic. We would be happy to remove every other baluster or whatever it takes to find that right kind of cohesive neighborhood design. But of course, when it comes to safety, I can say to them blue in the face, I think it's safe, but I'm a planner by trade. I'm not actually an engineer. So it's really hard for me to say these things. Would there be a possible recommendation that could come about working in with an expert to find a design and find assurances that are safe? We didn't actually work with Alvin Tan. I know he put this graphic here together, but his boss came out actually afterwards because there was some misunderstandings about the actual property that Alvin had, and that's why we worked with Mr. Skinner instead. And so I think public works staff, they were tremendous. The planning staff's been tremendous, but we would hope that maybe we could do something that is, an appropriate design paired with, an expert in the safety field, which I think would be probably the city engineer at Public Works again.
So can I interject? I think it's important that the commission provide the applicant with some clear understanding of where you want to go on a revised design, what kind of you're looking for. And maybe they can pick the materials, but you should be somewhat clear. When they file the revised design, I will send it to Public Works for re-review, and he will confirm whether or not it meets the sightline diagram he created. I'm not sure at this point that he would come back out there. If the design is lower and more opaque, it's only working in the right direction, or more open, I should say.
Great. Would you mind clarifying? He did accept the design as safe though, right? The version that we have proposed at the 48 inches, which we're measuring, because as you shared with me, there's a 12-inch gap between the 2 retaining walls, so we can measure from the grade behind the fence rather than from the bottom of retaining wall, because the code allows for that provision because it's 18 inches of separation.
I'm not following you. The design you filed is not got 18 inches of separation, and I would have to measure to the bottom of the retaining wall, as we've discussed.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you said because the 2 retaining walls were more than 12 inches apart, we could measure from the grade.
Right, from the upper wall.
Yes, that's why we were measuring the 42 inches and 48 inches, is because it was from the grade, because people walking in the front yard would have that fence at their hip level rather than maybe at their knee level. You might trip over it, I'm saying.
Right. But the Department of Public Works can re-review the project, but if you are working at making the design more open, that only further improves the sightline issues. So
okay. Would we need to go back to Public Works since they did accept this design though?
They actually don't accept or approve a design. That's what the planning commission is doing tonight, whether or not the design is acceptable and approvable and the findings can be made. All he does is look at it with regard to sightlines.
Oh, okay, and he approved it for the sightline safety then?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so it is safe from Public Works perspective, as it currently is proposed. Okay,
Well,
great, thank you.
It complies with the height limits that he has established.
Right, for being safe. Okay, cool. That's really helpful. So maybe Public Works isn't necessary since they've already determined that it's safe. But if there's a design aesthetic that the commissioners would like us to achieve, we'd be absolutely happy to do so.
Okay. I think that there's a couple different things happening, at least from my perspective. And I think there are ways to provide privacy for the bedrooms, and that might be something like a trellis or whatever over the windows that are back toward the house. It's more a perception of privacy, and but I think the fence feels a little bit high, even with having brought it down. So, and to be honest, it's, you know, the design of the fence doesn't do much for me. I'd rather see a lower element with some sort of wiring, 4x4 wires above or whatever that gives more of a airy sense. But that's really a design. That's something the applicant would have to deal with. So I guess what we're hearing, if I'm reading it right, is that we should deny it without prejudice. Is that?
No, I think we're going to continue it.
I mean, continue it. Sorry. Yes. Yeah.
To date uncertain.
To a date uncertain.
I think I would recommend continue it to date certain and request that the applicant, you know, provide revisions and provide the direction, you know, what, at least in general terms, what is it you're looking for?
We are running into the Christmas holiday, so I'm not sure this can be done in the next 2 weeks, Neil.
Yeah, I wouldn't, I'm not suggesting the next 2 weeks, but I would suggest that either the meeting of, you know, next first meeting in January or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good time.
Would my fellow commissioners like me to take a stab at a motion?
Please.
Because I've been turning this over in my head. Okay, I move to continue this item until the first meeting of January 2022, with guidance given to the applicant to design a fence that achieves their objectives of safety of for their home, while at the same time providing for a more open streetscape in the area in front of their home.
A more open streetscape or a more open design of the fence?
A more open, well, open design in order to protect the streetscape.
Can I have a second? Do you have that down, Kristen?
Yeah.
Sure, I'll second that.
Can we have a roll call?
I vote aye.
Commissioner Swisher?
Aye. I knew I was on the top.
Vice Chair Kunstler?
Aye.
Chair Wagstaff?
Aye.
And let the record show that Commissioners Tauber and Chalmers are absent.
Okay. I guess the next thing is any of the approval of the minutes from.
I move to
what
approve
is
the
that?
minutes
Second.
26th?
of
Yeah.
October 26, 2021.
Yeah, I'll second the approval of the minutes.
And all in favor? I'm.
Aye.
Aye. Planning commissioners reports. Anybody? I have a report, actually. I don't know where my camera is, but I have to show you my grandson.
Congratulations. That's great.
Congratulations, Brooke.
Xander Phoenix. He was born
Nice.
2 weeks ago.
Great.
Mazel tov as a
So
technical.
all I have to do is find a way to England.
Yeah.
Would somebody like to move to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Well,
Did we have-
Have a good Thanksgiving.